How are my young ladies and young gentlemen? All smart, gaining knowledge, studying with school and doing your own things. Lovely, lovely. And taking care of yourself and helping your elders and wearing masks. Absolutely. Do not go out unnecessarily. Please do not. It's spreading and coronavirus is spreading. Yeah. And wash your hands, use sanitizers, please, and help others. Okay, convince others to do the same. So let's get started. Today I have a story by an Indian author, R.K. Narayan. R.K. Narayan. And the name of the story is Horse and Two Goats. It was written in 1970. This is about very modest fellow, simple fellow, and modest background. Let's see what happens. A Horse and Two Goats by R.K. Narayan. Of the 700,000 villages dotting the map of India, in which the majority of India's 500 million live, flourish and die, Kritham was probably the tiniest indicated on the district survey map by a microscopic dot, the map being meant more for the revenue official out to collect tax than for the guidance of the motorist, who in any case could not hope to reach it since it sprawled far from highway at the end of a rough track furrowed up by the iron-hooped wheels of bullock carts. So very remotely located, tiniest town, which is not even noticeable to naked eye on the map, only it was important for the tax collectors. And the name of the town is Kritham. But its size did not prevent its giving itself the grandiose name Kritham, which meant in Tamil coronet or crown. How ironic. On the brow of this subcontinent. The village consisted of less than 30 houses, only one of them built with brick and cement. Painted a brilliant yellow and blue all over with gorgeous carvings of gods, gargoyles. On its balustrade, it was known as the Big House, the only concrete house in the 30-house village. The other houses, distributed in 4 streets, were generally of bamboo thatch, straw, mud, and other unspecified material. Munni. Now, his name is also Munni. Munni's was the last house in the 4th street. Very deliberate name, beyond which stretched the fields. In his prosperous days, Munni had owned a flock of 40 sheep and goats and sallied forth every morning, driving the flock on the highway a couple of miles away. They would sit on the pedestal of a clay statue of a horse while his cattle grazed ground. He carried a crook at the end of a bamboo pole and snapped foliage from the ebony trees to feed his flock. He also gathered faggots and dry sticks, bundled them and carried them home for fuel at sunset. His wife lit the domestic fire at dawn, boiled water in a mud pot, threw into it a handful of millet flour, added salt, and gave him his first nourishment for the day. When he started out, she would put in his hand a packed lunch, once again the same millet cooked into a little ball which he could swallow with a raw onion at midday. She was old, but he was older, and needed all the attention she could give him in order to be kept alive. His fortunes had declined gradually, unnoticed. From a flock of 40, which he drove into a pen at night, his stock had now come down to 2 goats. From 40 to goats. which were not worth the rent of a half rupee a month the big house charged for the use of the pen in their backyard. And so rich always snatch money whichever way they possibly can. And so the two girls were tethered to the trunk of a drumstick tree, which tethered, chained, shackled tree which grew in front of his hut and from which occasionally Muni could shake down drumsticks. This morning he got 6. He carried them in with a sense of triumph. Although no one could say precisely who owned the tree, it was his because he lived in its shadow. Simple. She said, if you were content with the drumstick leaves alone, I could boil and salt some for you. Oh, I'm tired of eating those leaves. I have a craving to chew the drumstick out of sauce. I tell you, you have only 4 teeth in your jaw, but your craving is for big things. That says a lot. It implies more. All right, get the stuff for the sauce and I'll prepare it for you. After all, next year you may not be alive to ask for anything. But first get me all the stuff, including a measure of rice or millet, and I'll satisfy your unholy craving. Our store is empty today. Dal, chili, curry, leaves, mustard, coriander, gingery oil, and 1 large potato. Go out and get all this. He repeated the list after her in order not to miss any item, and walked off the shop in the 3rd street, not very far. He sat on an upturned packing case, just like a crate. We pack fruit, mangoes, oranges in a crate, below the platform of the shop. The shopman paid no attention to him. Muni kept clearing his throat. Clearing his throat, coughing and sneezing until the shopman could not stand it anymore and demanded, what ails you? You will fly off that seat into that gutter if you sneeze so hard, young man. Muni laughed inaudibly in order to please the shopman at being called young man. The shopman softened and said, you have enough of the imp inside to keep a second file busy, but for the fact the old lady is still alive. Muni laughed appropriately again at his joke. It completely won the shopman over. He liked his sense of humor to be appreciated. Flattery. Muni engaged his attention in local gossip for a few minutes, which always ended with a reference to the postman's wife who had a load to the city some months before. So that's the juicy gossip they all like to talk about. Nothing else is exciting for them. The shopman felt most pleased to hear the worst of the postman who had cheated him. Being an itinerant postman, he returned home to Crichton only once in 10 days, and every time managed slip away again without passing the shop in the 3rd street. By thus humouring the shopman, Muni could always ask for 1 or 2 items of food, promising repayment later. Some days the shopman was in a good mood and gave in, and sometimes he would lose his temper, puff suddenly, and bark at Muni for daring to ask for credit. This was such a day, and Muni could not progress beyond 2 items listed as essential components from the wife's list. The shopman was also displaying a remarkable memory for old facts and figures, and took out an oblong ledger to support his observations. Muni felt impelled to rise and flee, but his self-respect kept him in his seat and made him listen to the worst things about himself. The shopman concluded if you could find rupees and a quarter, you would pay off an ancient debt and then could apply for admission to Swarga. How much have you got now? I'll pay you everything on the 1st of the next month. As always, and whom do you expect to rob by then? Muni felt caught and mumbled, my daughter has sent word that she'll be sending me money. Have you a daughter? Said the shopman, and she's sending you money? For what purpose, may I know? Lies, fantasies. money, starvation almost. Birthday, 50th birthday, said Muni quietly. Birthday? How old are you? Muni repeated weakly, not being sure of it himself. 50. He always calculated his age from the time of the Great Famine, when he stood as high as a parapet around the village well. But who could calculate such things accurately nowadays with so many famines occurring? Poverty, famine, climate changes. The shopman felt encouraged when other customers stood around to watch and comment. Munni thought helplessly, my poverty is exposed to everybody. What can I do? More likely you're 70, said the shopman. You also forget that you have mentioned a birthday 5 ago when you wanted castor oil for your holy bath. Bath, who can dream of a bath when you have to scratch the tank bed for a bowl of water? We would all be parched and dead but for the big house, where they let us take a pot of water from their well. After saying this, Muni unobtrusively rose and moved off. Oh, I actually sneezed. This was a real sneeze. Excuse me. My apologies. Oh, I can't read the name. Okay. He told his wife that scoundrel would not give me anything, so go out and sell the drumsticks for what they're worth. He flung himself down in a corner to recoup from the fatigue of his visit to the shop. His wife said, you're getting no sauce today, nor anything else. I can't find anything to give you to eat. Excuse me. Fast in the evening. It'll do you good. Take the goats and be gone now, she cried and added, don't come back before the sun is down. He knew that if he obeyed her, she would somehow conjure up some food for him in the evening. Only he must be careful not to argue and irritate her. Her temper was undependable in the morning, but improved by evening time. She was sure to go out and work, grind corn in the big house, sweep or scrub somewhere, and earn enough to buy foodstuff and keep it dinner ready for him in the evening. So she was the breadwinner. Unleashing the goats from the drumstick tree, Muni started out, driving them ahead and uttering weird cries from time to time in order to urge them on. He passed through the village, with his head bowed in. He did not want to look at anyone or be accosted. A couple of cronies lounging in the temple corridor hailed him, but he ignored the call. They had known him in the days of influence when he lorded over a flock of fleecy sheep. Excuse me, guys. A couple of cronies lounging in the temple corridor hailed him, but he ignored the call. They had known him in the days of influence when he lorded over a flock of fleecy sheep, not the miserable gawky goats that he had today. Of course, he also used to have a few goats for those who fancied them. But real wet laying sheep, they bred fast, and people came and bought the fleece in the shearing season. And that famous butcher from the town came over on the weekly market days, bringing him betel leaves, tobacco, and often enough some bhang, which they smoked in a hut in the coconut grove, undisturbed by wives and well-wishers. After smoke, one felt light and elated and inclined to forgive everyone, including that brother-in-law of his, who had once tried to set fire to his home. Oh my God, politics. But all this seemed like the memories of a previous birth. Some pestilence affected his cattle. He could, of course, guess who had laid his animals under a curse, and even the friendly butcher would not touch one at half the price. And now he was left with the two scraggy creatures. He wished someone would rid him out of their company too. The shopman had said that he was 70. At 70, one only waited to be summoned by God. When he was dead, what would his wife do? that they had lived in each other's company since they were children. He was told on their day of wedding that he was 10 years old and she was 8. During the wedding ceremony, they had had to recite their respective ages and names. He had thrashed only a few times in their career and later she had the upper hand. Oh, progeny? None, no children. Perhaps a large progeny would have brought him the blessing of the gods. Fertility brought merit. People with 14 sons were always so prosperous and peace with the world and themselves. He recollected the thrill he had felt when he mentioned a daughter to that shopman, although it was not believed. What if he did not have a daughter? His cousin in the next village had many daughters, and any one of them was as good as his. He was fond of them all and would buy them sweets if he could afford it. Still, everyone in the village whispered behind the backs that Munni and his wife were a barren couple. He avoided looking at anyone. How important for these people to have so many children. They become earning hands. I am the poorest fellow in our caste, and no wonder that they spurn me, but I won't look at them either. And so he passed on with his eyes downcast along the edge of the street, and people left him also very much alone, commenting only to the extent, there he goes with his 2 great goats. If he slits their throats, he may have more peace of mind. What has he to worry about anyway? They live on nothing and have nobody to worry about. Thus people commented. Then he passed through the village. Only on the outskirts did he lift his head and look up. He urged and bullied the goats until they meandered along to the foot of the horse statue. Okay. Excuse me, can I? Okay. The horse statue. Where am I? Now, this horse statue has a significance. On the edge of the village, he sat on his pedestal for the rest of the day. The advantage of this was that he could watch the highway and see the lorries and buses pass through to the hills, and it gave him a sense of belonging to a larger world. The pedestal of the statue was broad enough for him to move around as the sun traveled up and westward, or he could also crouch under the belly of the horse for shade. The horse was nearly half life-size, molded out of the clay, baked, burnt, and brightly colored, and reared its head proudly, prancing its 4 legs in the air and flourishing its tail in a loop. Now, cultural heritage, art in art form, mural, look at that. I guess that's the only precious, valuable monetarily. That's the only item the village can boast of. Okay, so it was made of clay, baked, burnt, and brightly colored. Okay, and flourishing its tail in a loop. Beside the horse stood a warrior with kite-like bulging eyes and aquiline nose. The old image makers believed in indicating a man of strength by bulging out his eyes and sharpening his mustache tips, and also had decorated the man's chest with beads, which looked today like blobs of mud through the ravages of sun and wind and rain when it came. But Munni would insist that he had known the beads to sparkle like the lime gems at one time in his life. The horse, so it had its glory. The horse itself was said to have been as white as a dhobi wash sheet and had on its back a cover of pure brocade of red and black lace, matching the multicolored sash around the waist of the warrior. But none in the village remembered the splendor, as no one noticed its existence. Even Munni, who spent all his waking hours at its foot, never bothered to look up. It was untouched by the young vandals of the village. So, vandals of the village, that's what I was reading. Yes, is that right? Okay. These vandals of the village, who gashed tree trunks with knives and tried to topple off milestones and inscribe new designs on all the walls. This statue had been closer to the population of the village at one time when this spot bordered the village. But when the highway was laid through, or perhaps with the tank and wells dried up completely, the village moved a couple of miles inland. Munni sat at the foot of the statue, watching his two goats graze in the arid soil among the cactus and bushes. He looked at the sun. It had tilted westward, no doubt, but it was not the time yet to go back home. If he went too early, his wife would have no food for him. Also, he must give her time to cool off her temper and feel sympathetic. Simple intelligence is there, and then she would scrounge and manage to get some food. He watched the mountain road for a time signal. When the green bus appeared round the bend, he could leave, and his wife would feel pleased that he had let the goats feed long enough. He noticed now a sort of vehicle coming down at full speed. It looked both like a motor car and a bus. He used to be intrigued by the novelty of such spectacles, but of late work was going on at the source of the river on the mountain, and an assortment of people and traffic went past him, and he took it all casually and described to his wife. Later in the day, not everything as he once did, but only some things, only if he noticed anything special. So guys, it's about time to finish and bid farewell, and I'll continue with the story. I hope you remember the name. The name is A Horse and Two Goats by R.K. Narayan. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe you can read up about this story. And look forward to seeing you next Thursday, and we'll finish the story and see what happens with that new vehicle coming up the pathway. Something different and unusual instead of the regular green bus he was waiting for. Is that right? So let's see what this man from humble grounds has to offer us. Okay? Bye-bye. Lovely to see you. Thank you.